What is object oriented programming? Object oriented programming OOP is a programming paradigm where the complete software operates as a bunch of objects talking to each other. Okay, so an object is what a collection of data and methods that operate on its data. Why OOP? The main advantage of OOP is better manageable code that covers following. First one, the overall understanding of the software is increased as the distance between the language spoken by the developers and the spoken by users. Second, object orientation is maintenance by the use of encapsulation. One can easily change the underlying representation by keeping the methods same. OOP paradigm is mainly useful for relatively big software. See this for a complete example that show advantage of OOP over procedural programming. What are the main feature of OOP? First one encapsulation, second one polymorphism, and third one is inheritance. So what is encapsulation? So encapsulation is referred to one of the following two notations. First one is data hiding. Data hiding is a language feature to restrict access to members of an object. For example, private and protected members in C++. Second one is bundling of data and methods together. Data and methods that operate on the data are bundled together. What is polymorphism? How it is supported by C++? So polymorphism means that some code or operation or objects behave differently in different contexts. In C++, following feature support polymorphism. First one is compile time polymorphism and second one is runtime polymorphism. So compile time polymorphism means compiler knows which function should be called when a polymorphic call is made. C++ supports compiler time polymorphism by supporting features like templates, function overloading, and default arguments. Runtime polymorphism is supported by virtual functions. The idea is virtual functions are called according to the type of object pointed or referred, not according to the type of pointer or reference. In other words, virtual functions are resolved late at runtime. What is inheritance? What is the purpose of inheritance? The idea of inheritance is simple. A class is based on another class and uses data and implementation of other class. The purpose of inheritance is code reuse. What is abstraction? The first thing with which one is confronted when writing program is is the problem. Typically, we are confronted with real life problems and we want to make life easier by providing a program for the problems. However, real life problems are nebulous, and the first thing we have to do is to try to understand the problem to separate necessary from unnecessary details. We try to obtain our own abstract view or model of the problems. This process of modeling is called abstraction. What is OOPS? OOPS stands for Object Oriented Programming System. Is the programming technique to write programs based on the real world objects. The states and behaviors of an object are represented as the member variables and methods. In OOPS, programming programs are organized around objects and data rather than action and logic. What are the advantages of OOPS concept? Major advantages of OOPS programming are simplicity, modularity, modifiability, extensibility, maintainability, and reusability. So, what is simplicity? OOPS programming objects model real world object, so the complexity is reduced and the program structure is clear. Modularity, each object form a separate entity whose internal working are decoupled from other parts of the system. Modifiability, it is used to make minor changes in the data representation or the procedures in an OO program. Changes inside a class do not affect any other part of a program, since the only public interface that the external world has to a class is through the use of methods. Extensibility, adding new feature or responding to changing operating environments can be solved by introducing a few new objects and modifying some existing ones. Maintainability, objects can be maintained separately, making locating and fixing problem easier. Reusability, objects can be reused in different programs. What is the difference between procedural programming and OOPS? Procedural language is based on function, but object oriented language is based on real world objects. Procedural language gives importance on the sequence of function execution, but object oriented language gives importance on states and behaviors of the objects. Procedural language exposes the data on the entire program, but object oriented language encapsulates the data. Procedural language follows top-down programming paradigm, but object-oriented language follows bottom-up programming paradigm. Procedural language is complex in nature, so it is difficult to modify, extend, and maintain, but object-oriented language is less complex in nature, so it is easier to modify, extend, and maintain. Procedural language provides less scope of code reuse, but object-oriented language provides more scope of code reuse. What are the core concepts of OOPS? OOPS core concepts are abstraction, encapsulation, polymorphism, inheritance, composition, association, aggregation. What is abstraction? Abstraction is an OOPS concept to construct the structure of the real world objects. During this construction, only the general states and behaviors are taken and more specific states and behavior are left aside for the implementer. What is encapsulation? Encapsulation is an OOPS concept to create and define the permission and restriction of an object and its member variables and methods. A very simple example to explain the concept is to make the member variable of a class private and providing public getter and setter methods. Java provides four types of access level modifiers: public, protected, no modifier, and private. What is the difference between abstraction and encapsulation? Program to interface, not implementation, is the principle of abstraction, and encapsulate what varies is the OO principle for encapsulation. Abstraction provides a general structure of a class and leaves the details for the implementer. Encapsulation is to create and define the permissions and restrictions of an object and its member variable and methods. Abstraction is implemented in Java using interface and abstract class, while encapsulation is implemented using four types of access level: public, protected, no modifier, and private. What is polymorphism? Polymorphism is the occurrence of something in various forms. Java supports various forms of polymorphism like polymorphic reference variable, polymorphic method, polymorphic return types, and polymorphic argument types. What is inheritance? A subclass can inherit the states and behaviors of its superclass is known as inheritance. What is multiple inheritance? A child class inheriting states and behavior from multiple parents class is known as multiple inheritance. What is diamond problem in inheritance? In case of multiple inheritance, suppose class A has two subclass B and C and a class D has two superclasses B and C. If a method present in A is overridden by both B and C but not by D, then from which class D will inherit that method, B or C? This problem is known as diamond problem. Why Java does not support multiple inheritance? Java was Java was designed to be a simple language, and multiple inheritance introduce complexities like diamond problem, inheriting states or behaviors from two different types of class is a case which in reality very rare, and it can be achieved easily through an object association. What is static binding and dynamic binding? Static or early binding is resolved at compile time. Method overloading is an example of static binding. Dynamic or late or virtual binding is resolved at runtime. Method overriding is an example of dynamic binding. What is the meaning of is a and has a relationship? What is the meaning of is a and has a relationship? Is a relationship implies inheritance. A subclass object is said to have is a relationship with the superclass or interface. If class A extends B, then A is B. It is transitive. That is, if class A extends B and class B extends C, then A is C. The instance of operator in Java determines the is a relationship. When a class A has a member reference variable of type B, then A has a B. It is also known as aggregation. What is association? Association is a relationship between two objects with multiplicity. What is aggregation? Aggregation is also known as has a relationship. When class car has a member reference variable of type wheel, then the relationship between the class car and wheel is known as aggregation. Aggregation can be understood as whole to its parts relationship. Car is the whole and wheel is part. Wheel can exist without the car. Aggregation is a weak association. What is composition? Composition is a special form of aggregation where the part cannot exist without the whole. Composition is a strong association. Composition relationship is represented like aggregation with one difference that the diamond shape is filled. What is dependency? When one class depends on another because it uses that at some point in in time, then this relationship is known as dependency. One class depends on another if the independent class is parameter variable or local variable of a diamond of the dependent class. A dependency is drawn as dotted line from the dependent class to the independent class with an arrowhead pointing to the independent class. What is difference between association and dependency? The main difference between association and dependency is in case of association, one class has an attribute or member variable of the other class type, but in case of dependency, a method takes an argument of the other class type or a method has a local variable of the other class type. What is a class? A class is the specification or template of an object. So what is an object? Object is an instance of class. Define a constructor. Constructor is a method used to initialize the states of an object and it gets invoked at the time of object creation. Rules for constructor are: constructor name should be the same as the class name. Constructor must have no return type. What is destructor? Destructor is a method which is automatically called when the object is made of a scope or destroyed. Destructor name is also same as class name but with the tilde symbol before the name. What is inline function? Inline function is a technique used by the compilers and instruct to insert complete body of the function wherever the function is used in the program source code. What is operator overloading? Operator overloading is a function where different operators are applied and depends on the argument. Operators can be used to pass through the function and it has their own precedence to execute. What is an abstract class? An abstract class is a class which cannot be initiated. Creation of an object is not possible with abstract class, but it can be inherited. An abstract class can contain only abstract method. Java allows only abstract method in abstract class, while for other languages it allows non-abstract method as well. What is an interface? An interface is a collection of abstract method. If the class implements an inheritance and then thereby inherits all the abstract method of an interface. What is exception handling? Exception is an event that occurs during the execution of a program. Exception can be any type: runtime exception or error exception. Those exceptions are handled properly through exception handling mechanism like try, catch, throw and throw keywords. What is dynamic or runtime polymorphism? Dynamic or runtime polymorphism is also known as method overriding, in which call to an overridden function is resolved during runtime, not at the compile time. It means having two or more methods with the same name, same signature, but with different implementation. What is static and dynamic binding? Binding is nothing but the association of a name with the class. Static binding is a binding in which name can be associated with the class during compilation time and it is also called as early binding. Dynamic binding is a binding in which name can be associated with the class during execution time and it is also called as late binding. What is a copy constructor? This is a special constructor for creating a new object as a copy of an existing object. There will be always only one copy constructor that can be either defined by the user or the system. Difference between class and an object. An object is an instance of a class. Object hold any information but class don't have any information. Definition of properties and function can be done at the class and can be used by the object. Class can have subclasses and an object doesn't have subobjects. What is difference between structure and a class? Structure default access type is public but class access type is private. A structure is used for grouping data whereas class can be used for grouping data and methods. Structures are exclusively used for data and it does not require strict validation, but classes are used to encapsulate and inherit data which requires strict validation.